When I first saw ChatGPT 3 years ago, I was like, oh, haha, this is great. It sounds kind of smart, but it's really
Hmm.
dumb and it can't really do anything, right? This is not coming for our jobs anytime soon. And I still think it's not coming for our jobs anytime soon, but I do think that is going to happen faster now than I would have said 3 years ago. I guess just my immediate imagination is more being done with the same amount of people or less people,
Hmm.
more people walking around with oversight over more machinery, and more, yeah, I don't know whether it's going to be more specialized skills or actually more generalized skills
Right.
because we've
Yep.
abstracted the specific programming language of this particular piece of equipment
Hmm.
into more of an understanding of how does process work? How do things get made? And then what processes, robotic and otherwise, do I need to oversee in order to make those things happen? But I
Absolutely.
think we have a lot more jobs that require someone to understand the point of the plant, the inputs and the outputs of the line, the entire process and how it works, rather than somebody coming in and being trained only specifically to use one piece of equipment. And those people not needing to know the overarching process of the entire plant and how it actually creates value and how it works.
Absolutely. It's the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. Thank you so much for being with us. We talk often on the podcast about the fact that I am a strong and non believer in coincidence. Call it the Celestine prophecy. There's something greater at work in just about everything that we do. And when coincidences happen, I believe that there's something at work there too. So I was in the great state of South Dakota at Lake Area Technical College, speaking at an event. I'm moderating this panel and we invite questions from the audience. And somebody says, have you ever heard of the Automation Ladies podcast? And I was like, it rings a faint bell. They said it was amazing. That's the first part of the coincidence. That's setting it up. The second part is literally like 3 days later, the host of that podcast reaches out, I think on LinkedIn, and says, hey, love your work. We're doing some really cool stuff. You want to get together? We did. We hit it off. She's doing unbelievable stuff, not just on the podcast, which we are going to talk about, but in other parts of her life as well. Great pleasure to extend this incredible coincidence. Nikki Gonzales, thank you so much for being with us. She is the Director of Business Development for a company called Weintek. We're going to learn all about that. The co-founder of Automation Ladies and co-founder of OT SCADACon. If you're not familiar with that, some of you will be. We are going to know all about that in just a moment. Nikki, great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. I'm a big believer in coincidences as well. So
Awesome.
I know that when we first got on that call and you told me that somebody had just talked about me, I was like, okay, I knew there was something that made me reach out to you at that point in time.
You're exactly right. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you did because I'm so impressed with the work you're doing. And we're going to get into that. As you know, here on the Tech Ed podcast, we're all about manufacturing technology, advancements in manufacturing, how everything from UX and user experience and how we're interacting with manufacturing technologies to artificial intelligence, machine learning, all the advancements that are happening in automation. We're going to get into all of that kind of stuff. But I want to start with this. Talk a little bit about your history. How did you get into manufacturing and then what led you to Wintech?
My dad is an electrical engineer who did embedded control systems early on in his career. When I was little, he also had a side gig where he would put together computers, and he was always the kind of person that had like multiple things going on. So I'm from Iceland originally.
Hmm.
And he ended up being hired by a British company, and we came to the US when I was in middle school. And my dad ended up starting his own company after he moved here. So I started working there in middle school. It was a technology company doing tracking and communications for fleets of trucks. Back before IoT was really a concept, it was telematics and satellite communication and things like that, web-based interfaces. And I got really lucky that I got to grow up in that business, essentially. I still didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I don't think I ever will.
Hmm.
I'm just the type of personality that constantly likes to try new things and learn new things. Um, but that gave me an interest in the technical side of things. Although I did need my dad's help with my AP physics and stuff, so I realized that the engineering side was maybe not for me. I really liked leading clubs and being involved in different organizations because I wanted to know a little bit about everything, right? And so I found, just kind of coincidentally, that one of the last summers I worked for my dad as an intern, I stumbled into technical sales.
Hmm.
And when I realized that I could get a technical job without an engineering degree,
Hmm.
that's kind of what I went for. And I looked at jobs in the campus recruiting that were engineering adjacent but didn't require an engineering degree. And found myself becoming a machine vision sales engineer coming out of school with a company called Keyence that does,
Yep.
direct sales, and they're very training heavy. And so I was very lucky to kind of find a great way to get into the industry. And I saw the inside of so many factories during those first few years when I was really an applications engineer, a sales engineer, a trainer, a technical support person for these specialized applications of a technology that was fairly new at that time, machine vision for automated inspection.
Right.
And then I ended up moving into pneumatics once I got really good at vision. And I looked up
Nice.
and down the line and was like, okay, what do we do when the part doesn't pass the visual inspection? Well, we got to kick it out. And how do motors work and pneumatics and motion and all this cool stuff. And I just sort of kept following these different opportunities that came my way. And I ended up doing simulation for electrical design to make sure that, products are easy to manufacture and that they're going to pass inspection and things like that, cutting down the prototyping cycle. And I ended up working in the startup world in software at the time using machine learning and AI for predictive analytics in the supply chain. And then in the end, that kind of converged into me working at a startup that worked in the supply chain in industrial automation, helping companies find parts and sort of procure their bills of materials during COVID when things were very difficult. It was very hard to get product, particularly if you're like a complex machine builder with a huge bill of materials with hundreds or thousands of parts from different suppliers. It was a very difficult time. And that's actually when I heard about Weintek, because during all that craziness, they were the only HMI supplier that was quoting anything in stock or less than, let's say, 32 weeks. I mean, it was a
Right.
really rough time there for
Yep.
some people.
So awesome, by the way, that you had a dad that got you interested in these kind of things, and that is so so cool. I didn't need any help at all, by the way, from my dad in AP Physics. You know why? Because I got nowhere near AP Physics, right? I mean, I had, there was no AP after any class or before any class that I took in high school. Congratulations, obviously, even though you needed some help from your dad, you're brilliant if you're in an AP Physics class, which is awesome. Doesn't surprise me. Also, love the fact that you found your way into manufacturing technology without necessarily that engineering formal training. That's my background as well. I'm not an engineer, although I get mistaken for one quite often, but found my way into the technology a little bit different way. Speaking of technology in general and HMI specific, just give our audience a sense for, Wintech and HMI. What's the product that you're involved with? How does that fit into manufacturing?
Absolutely. So, an HMI stands for human machine interface. Sometimes it's called the operator interface, but these are basically touchscreen computers that go on machines
Hmm.
and are used to control the machine, oftentimes understand what's going on with the machine. Wintech was started in 1995 by
Okay.
some engineers in Taiwan who saw the trend of push button control of machines now that they were developing these LCD screens, touch screens for other technologies, that we should bring them onto machines into
Hmm.
these industrial environments. And so they've kind of been a pioneer, but a very specialized, focused company on developing human machine interfaces from the very first, very old school looking touchscreen of the 90s to today. And so they've become quietly one of the most highest volume HMI manufacturers in the world because we focus specifically just on that.
Sure.
And so we develop hardware as well as software to program the HMI. They sell primarily to machinery OEMs, so to companies that are making machines that then go into factories so that they can design the interface that they need for the machine, as well as have all the different ways of collecting data and displaying that and communicating that to the rest of the plant, for instance.
Yeah, I think when a lot of us think of HMIs, our minds sort of immediately go to the kind of HMIs that might be integrating with a programmable logic controller on a fully integrated manufacturing line. And usually when I see them in manufacturing, they are because an integrator who is putting together some process to manufacture a specific product or component or assembly or what have you, use this a given control system, and then there's an HMI that's associated with that system. And so you've got an OEM, to your point, that's building a piece of equipment used in manufacturing, needs that piece of equipment to interact with a user, or an operator utilizes a Wintech HMI to embed that on the machine tool or in the piece of manufacturing equipment. I got that right, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very, very cool. One of the things that I've been on a kick on for probably 5 years, 4 years at least, is the whole idea. We a lot of different names for it: edge to cloud continuum, embedded AI, physical AI. applied artificial intelligence, what have you. Huge believer that the way that we use AI in the physical world is really going to be even more important and more prolific than and more transformative than things like generative pre-trained transformers like ChatGPT or Perplexity. Both important, but I think that's where the future is. Jensen Huang, who, as we know, is the CEO of NVIDIA, just got up at the Consumer Electronics Show in November and said basically what we've been saying for 3.5 years, which is physical AI is the future. Would love to hear a little bit about how you're seeing AI being integrated in Wintek's products now. We'll go into that a little bit deeper, but kind of surface level, where are you seeing some of the embedded intelligence in your products today?
Yeah, so we are actually part of NVIDIA's Inception program, which is technically a startup accelerator
Hmm.
for companies utilizing AI, but they're not limited to startups. And we are like a startup in the sense that we're always trying to innovate on the
Hmm.
HMI. So even though we've been around for 30 years, we try to act like we're, at trying to be at the forefront of our chosen niche, right? But funny enough that you say that about Jensen, I was actually at an event here in Houston recently called 3D Experience World, which is
Okay.
SolidWorks sort of ecosystem of
Yep.
software.
Sure.
And I got to ask Jensen a question at the press
Oh, no
conference.
way. Wow.
And he answered, and I asked him about manufacturers, and
Okay.
about small to medium sized manufacturers, and whether or not, this AI boom is something that's accessible to them, or, what sort of context, because we're not seeing it there yet,
Hmm.
And they're showing all these great, kind of factories of the future and things. And I think to a lot of practitioners today, still in the long tail of manufacturing, it's a little hard to place how that
Sure.
relates to you or
Yep.
where you are. And he said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask me about this
Awesome.
for 3 years."
Very
So,
cool.
when you said that for 3 years, they've been saying this, that's absolutely true, and I think that he actually really is passionate about this use case.
Awesome. What did he say?
His answer was absolutely that the, deterministic way of programming machines is actually a limitation to who has been able to automate, who's been able to afford to automate, and obviously these, high mix, low volume applications that a lot of smaller companies have to deal with, they are
Hmm.
much, much harder to automate when you have to, build a specific piece of equipment, or for instance, a robot, you have to program it exactly to do a certain thing, right?
Hmm.
The changeover, the programming, it's not feasible for smaller companies. And he really believes that moving from deterministic programming to implicit programming through teaching basically these machines more general purpose skills, and then
Hmm.
being able to piece those skills together or just give it instructions that are not hard coded, is really going to lift the small to medium sized manufacturer to be able to do more and compete better in this global landscape. I think that there's some mixed reality to that. People from our industry may or may not say, that exact same thing, particularly, the bullishness on like the humanoid form
Right.
factor and different things. But I think that he's really passionate about that. And I thought that that was really cool.
No, that's really interesting, and I think it's coming a lot faster than people think. And whether it is a full on humanoid that's walking around the plant like an individual or a person would, or whether it's just understanding what we call biomimicry and understanding how we can take the best of both worlds, the automated world and human interaction and human motion and so on, put those together and then create some really cool use cases and solutions. I think you're right though. I mean, you think about if I'm programming a CNC machine and I'm doing it, there's conversational programming now that's much better than it used to be, but you've got to understand G code and M code. If I'm programming a robot and I need to understand a specific programming language, which is fine. Versus when I get to the point where I can tell some physical piece of equipment, pick this part up there and put it over there and do it without dropping it and do one every 20 seconds or whatever. Then you start to think about how we can deploy automation and how we can leverage technology like NVIDIA, like some of the AI platforms that we have into a really cool future world of manufacturing. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit as well, but I want to give you an opportunity to go as deep as you want on this partner. Talk about that relationship and what you're trying to do there.
Sure. So, HMI really, it's the interface of the human to the machine, but also kind of the way that the machine talks to everything else in the plant. So you
Mhm.
kind of mentioned like you have a PLC and you have an HMI and it may be running a line. Well, that line is usually put together. Somebody integrates a bunch of different equipment that talks
Mhm.
to each other. And so the HMI is kind of the natural point in which any cell or subcell or piece of equipment can then talk to its outside environment, whether that's to a database, right, for a software to be able to do predictive analytics, or communicating information up to the ERP system or the MES. So that the HMI has become this natural aggregation point for data from the machine because it talks
Hmm.
to the PLC and it talks to everything else on that machine. And so OPCUA is kind of an open standard that's been used very commonly for this machine connectivity. And what it's done is brought a sort of centralized way to talk machine language across an open protocol, so different pieces of equipment can communicate. And being able to communicate with AI is also how do you get a machine, like a standard manufacturing machine, to be able to benefit from, plug into, or communicate with AI.
Hmm.
There's a few different ways to do that. Sort of the established way for the last decade or so has been through APIs. So we've
Hmm.
actually had some customers that have, used a Weintek HMI to talk to Gemini, for instance.
Okay.
It's fairly easy with an API, and our software fully supports API connections,
Hmm.
but they are still kind of a one-to-one. So an API is kind of similar to like a phone call. You have to know somebody's number, you have to know how to communicate, and then you can pass information back and
Right.
forth.
Format the data in a way that both can understand it. Yep.
Yeah, there is a new way that AI agents and applications are talking to each other, an open standard as well, that was developed by Anthropic called MCP, or Model Context Protocol.
Hmm.
I think kind of the natural extension of having something like OPCUA sitting on the HMI that can take information from everything on the machine, do calculations, add some context, right? The HMI typically handles things like showing data and trends, alerting operators or plant personnel if something is, trending the wrong way or something goes wrong, and then communicating this information up to a SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition software, or any of the other larger plant systems. The HMI, I think, is also still then this it's the right place to communicate with the machine to any kind of AI agent, or
Hmm.
any kind of AI application, or other systems that want to kind of talk this language. So you mentioned LLMs before. LLMs are great ways to talk to something. You don't want to rely on them generating information and doing your work for you, but they are great when put together as interfaces to systems. And so the promise, I think, of integrating more and more AI into the HMI is that it's this natural aggregation point. You're already communicating a lot of information back and forth. And then just to be able to talk to any kind of AI agent, whether that's an established LLM from one of the big companies, or if you're a big, manufacturer of any size right now, it's the big ones, right? But even
Hmm.
they may be developing their own enterprise AI applications, and they need that sort of standardized way to be able to talk to things and know that the information that they're getting is the right thing.
Awesome.
And so we are actively developing these capabilities in addition to other things that are a little bit more common now in the market, like AI assistants, right? So we don't have an AI that will program the HMI for you. I think in our industry, we're a bit away from AI actually making any kinds of decisions like that. But what it can do is assist you in scripting. So the programming part, not the drag and drop or, connecting to tags or specific things like that with the PLC, but we allow for free scripting, which is kind of an advanced way to be able to write HMI programming. And
Hmm.
we have an assistant in there. And then we also have an assistant that we've built through a retrieval augmentation type architecture that knows our manual. So our programming manual for our software is like 1,100 pages long because it's a very powerful software with a lot of advanced features.
Hmm.
And so for beginners, it can be, I would say, not a learning curve necessarily. It's called Easy Builder Pro because it's very intuitive for the drag and drop interface, and you can create very powerful but sort of standard HMIs with that.
Hmm.
But I'd say our power users are the ones that get really good at the scripting because then it becomes so flexible. And that's where the AI agent embedded in our software now can really cut that learning curve from kind of a new user, maybe learning how to do HMI programming, to be able to become an expert pretty quickly, and being able to do advanced features and things like that with the scripting. It helps for debugging as well, which is, a big frustration for programmers out there anywhere.
Right.
Um, and so we're really looking at how can we lower the learning curve for those that want to get into doing HMI development, and then also just save everybody time in the process of doing so, but definitely not replacing either the programmers that are putting together the HMI, or any of the decisions that should be made by humans on the factory floor. We just need to give them better context, and easier to digest information.
Well, and it's a good thing in this convergence of artificial intelligence and manufacturing that we don't talk in letters, right? Because OPCUA AI, MCP, LLM, HMI, but super, super fascinating. So when we think about what Nikki is sharing with us and this whole idea of first of all, the human machine interface kind of sitting at the apex, if you will, of all the other technology that's going on. So, whether it's communicating with a PLC, programmable logic controller, there's another three letters I don't think I mentioned when I was unpacking some of that. Talking to the computer of manufacturing, if you will, we've got other sensors that might be involved. We've got APIs. That's another one. I don't think that I mentioned. Maybe I did mention API, but we've got APIs between the HMI and other sources of data, if you will. So, really, really fascinating what's happening in the world of manufacturing as we come up with more ways for this data to move. And so I've been fascinated by MCP servers, and we've got a number of projects going on in some of our businesses where we're tapping into a wide variety of different data sources, pulling that data into an MCP, and then using agentic AI to query that data and draw conclusions and find inference and connections that we're not being able to see in our business. So that is really what this is all about. Is you take a platform like OPCUA, which is now it's almost like the translator for manufacturing equipment. So for a long time, manufacturers were they just wanted to own the communication protocol for their equipment, so nobody else could break into that. They're finding now that that's a disadvantage because if your system can't talk to something else, you're going to be limited in its deployment. So now we've got this OPCUA platform where we can move data around basically a common language for lack of a better term. So a sensor or an input device from one company can talk to a sensor or an output device, I should say, from another company, and so on. Really, it's just so many fascinating things that are going on in the world of advanced manufacturing, and we could see why A, this partnership with NVIDIA, and B, the fact that you sit at the juncture of all these different systems within manufacturing in terms of the technology that you're deploying makes the HMI in a lot of ways the ideal point to kind of feed all of this data to and from where it needs to go and what we can do with it. That's really fascinating. Super complicated for somebody who's on the development side, right? So if I'm an integrator, if I'm developing new products, um, how do I stay focused enough to make sure that I'm doing this, at scale, at speed, but also we're dealing with manufacturing. It's product quality, it's human safety. I mean, we're not messing around with stuff that just you can afford to screw up. How should I be thinking about that if I'm like on the engineering or the development side?
If you're a systems integrator, I think that you want to start working more and more with these open platforms, right? A lot of the skills here are kind of have been ecosystem related because you think
Hmm.
about the big. If you walk into a manufacturing plant, they've usually standardized on somebody's control systems across the board. Aside from things like our equipment will or our HMI will come in on equipment, but if the plant is kind of deciding the entire control system, they
Yep.
usually go with one of the big vendors
Hmm.
that do like these proprietary
Yeah,
protocols, like you've
they've all
mentioned.
been on the podcast, by the way. We had Barbara Humpton, the CEO of Siemens, Blake Moret, the chairman and CEO of Rockwell. I mean, so our audience should be pretty familiar with some of those brands for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so the reality is that most plants out there are going to be defaulted to one of these big ecosystems,
Hmm.
which makes total sense in the context in which they operate. Now, what you do have to think about, though, is you are going to get equipment maybe that speaks another language, or maybe you have mixed vintages of equipment, things like that. So it is great to have options that can communicate very well with these big ecosystems, and then with also kind of every other thing that you may have randomly come in or already
Hmm.
be in your plant that maybe isn't speaking that modern protocol or that latest and greatest networking connectivity. So
Sure.
one of the things that we've done again because we are a specialty manufacturer, we only focus on HMIs. If we wanna sell any HMIs, they have to talk to other people's stuff,
Sure.
just by
Absolutely.
default, right? So what we've done is we've kinda kept it as that connection layer, and so we keep, for instance, old connectors, so we have 2 serial ports still on all of our devices, as well as 2 Ethernet ports, right? So
Hmm.
we have the latest and greatest in segmented Ethernet networks, but we also have RS-232 input if you need it, and we maintain drivers for all of the old equipment. So if you have a PLC from 30 years ago, that the reality is in a lot of plants, there's still something like that running.
Yeah, it's
And
like
the
500s,
philosophy is,
PLC4s. We see them all the time. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
if it's not broken, don't fix it. Or you
Yep.
just may not have it's downtime. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why there's still a
For
lot of
sure.
legacy equipment out there.
You bet.
And so what we want to do is make sure that our HMI can speak to all of that. It can speak
Hmm.
to all of the old equipment in whatever form it is in terms of, how modernized that plant may be. And so that you can do these new things with data if you
Hmm.
want to. even if you haven't fully upgraded or modernized every piece of equipment that you have in your plant. And then you can communicate with that and keep updating. So we have these drivers for absolutely everything that you can imagine and supporting everything from the old to the new protocols so that there is something that can translate this stuff. And it can enable you to work within whatever ecosystem you want and then also be able to speak to something maybe new, something that isn't coming from that vendor. There are a lot of platforms now that kind of enable all this interconnectivity. And so I think from a relevancy and, competitiveness standpoint is take whatever your uh, competency is so far in terms of traditional technology and the big brands, and then layer on some of the things that you can do to be innovative, and to connect things more easily. Maybe come up with some of your own solutions that you can, sell with your expertise. Most integrators have
Sure.
certain types of experience. They've sort
For
of seen
sure.
certain problems again and again across different types of manufacturers or different systems. I think now is a really fun time that could enable even a smaller integrator or developer to come up with a solution to problems they've seen many times by having access to some low cost, more standardized, kind of open ways to develop libraries or tools or AI agents or things that they really have that domain expertise in. They don't have to be a big software house or, a huge vendor to be able to do something like that either for their customer base or for more of the industry at large.
For sure, yeah, they don't need to be an expert in necessarily every aspect of that. And now with some of the abilities to build, whether it's your own app or your own agent, or just prompted GPT to help you develop a solution that doesn't exist to a problem that exists. It's all kinds of opportunities for people on the development side to innovate and to do it. You don't need to be $1 billion company to do it anymore, which I think is really cool and is going to drive a ton of innovation. We still have to have some base level of skills, though, for sure. I mean,
Oh,
I
absolutely.
know we agree on that. So let's touch on some of that. I just had a conversation within the last week about people are putting skills into categories like perishable or durable. Like a perishable skill is something you're not going to need 10 years from now. Durable is something that is going to last a lifetime. And so a real simplistic example of that might be programming a very specific type of machine tool in a specific language on a specific piece of equipment. That's probably a perishable skill. Maybe you don't need that same exact skill 10 years from now. Something like problem solving, critical thinking, that's a durable skill. I've been putting a lot of thought into this because I think there's so many of them that could cross over. And I think about things like gate logic in manufacturing, so and or not nor and in memory. So understanding how we make, for instance, electric relays work on a manufacturing line, or how that transcends the physical world into programming a PLC using ladder logic as an example, which are really really tied together skills. And I look at that and I say, you can say that's a perishable skill, but I think those are the kind of skills that transcend changes in technology, because we're always going to have aspects of that. Agree or disagree? And what are some of those base level skills that aren't going away, even though we've got an agentic AI world and a world of generative pre-trained transformers that can solve all kinds of problems for us that we didn't have access to or solutions for in the past.
I think you're absolutely right, and I agree with you that some of the basic skills, understanding innately how something works, physics,
Hmm.
process, electricity, motion, right? These are skills that even if you end up having a software or an agent do that work for you, if you don't
Hmm.
understand the underlying mechanics, you have no business using an agent to do that job.
Hmm.
Um,
Awesome.
and yeah, I could elaborate on that a
Yeah,
lot.
no, it's really, really well put. I mean, keep going, but I love the way that you succinctly put that. Is that and that directly is like, if you don't understand what it is that you're managing, that you're fixing, that you're improving, what those base technologies are that you're responsible for, going and asking any version of AI to be able to improve process, to make a change to that process, and you just take that answer and implement it without understanding what's happening with the underlying technology. Your point of you have no business doing that. I think you're totally exactly right, and that's dangerous and can lead to all kinds of problems. Stay on that thread. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I mean, unless it's like a hobby or something that you're just exploring, then, by all means go nuts.
For
But
sure.
make sure that the stakes are none, right?
Right. Yeah. In your garage and not on a $1 billion manufacturing floor.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think that it's really elevating us almost as humans to all of us become managers of more rather than and architects of
Hmm.
process. In my opinion, anyway, the best managers I've had, they've done the job at some point. they understand the realities. It's very difficult to work for a manager that has no clue what's actually going on the ground, because
Hmm.
they will miss signals or not understand, why certain things are the way that they are. And I think that we all need to start thinking about ourselves or in our future careers as managers of agents and technology and
Hmm.
ourselves, and then, working within a team, whether that's working within again, a team of humans and agents. It'll be some combination, right, of kind of machine intelligence that you bring with you in your career, and then yourself, right? Just like we always have, like, I when I graduated, I used a laptop, right? And then I
Hmm.
started working contract jobs at some point, and my laptop is just a tool that I use. I have a lot of software I've learned how to use. I've got, I like to use certain types of technologies, and I come into a job already with those skills, and
Hmm.
not everybody in the organization necessarily uses them. And that's part of kind of what I bring to the table in my career. And I think our AI knowledge and our ability to interact with agents and maybe do our job more agentically than we did in the past is going to be part of our value as co-creators or employees in a company, or whatever that sort of future looks like.
Absolutely. Well, just going back to what Jensen Huang said, he had another quote within the last week, I think, as we record this, maybe 10 days, where somebody said, what is the most important skill if I'm going into the workforce? And he said, understanding how to use AI, having an understanding of how you can use, a GPT as a coworker, as I like to think. And anymore, if I'm on my computer working on something, I've got, one of either Claude Perplexity, Chat GPT, Copilot, Meta AI, or maybe multiples of them working alongside of me, asking it a question, going back to the work and back and forth. And it is insane how, especially if you're in a paid version of one of those, how much it learns about you over time and how much it can, oh well, I know you're interested in this. This is how this would manifest, or you're in this business. You should be thinking about it this way. And it's like, I didn't even ask you that, but that's really really good. But having that ability to interact with whether it's an agent that's working inside of a workflow that you've created, whether it's interacting with a GPT, or whether it's understanding the physical AI side and how we're acquiring data and then improving process using various aspects of machine learning and so on. All that super super important. What does the future look like in manufacturing as we start to bring more and more agentic AI, more and more smart technology, embedded smart technology? Abilities for different pieces of equipment, even legacy equipment, to communicate and provide us data and insights that we can use for continuous improvement. If I'm standing on a modern shop floor in 5 or 10 years, how is that going to look different?
I've never been a big fan of predicting, because Moore's law, right? Which is the law that says that electronics basically have gotten cheaper by, like, I don't know, a half or something every year. That
Yeah,
it's
I've never heard
exponential.
of, that whole idea of products doubling in price performance every 12 to 18 months, that was promulgated by Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, beginning in the 1960s, and has continued to, nope, never heard of that. Keep rolling.
Right. So that has proven to be pretty correct, and that is also why we have the AI that we have today, right? Is because of
Yep.
the computing power.
Yep.
And one of the observations that really struck me was that for the last, like, known history of man, we've been
Hmm.
in the kind of bottom part of this curve before it got exponential. Now it is going exponential, and we don't have mental models to tell us how quickly this is going to evolve. And I think LLMs have kind of shown us that too. When I first saw ChatGPT 3 years ago, I was like, oh, haha, this is great. It sounds kind of smart, but it's really
Hmm.
dumb and it can't really do anything, right? This is not coming for our jobs anytime soon. And I still think it's not coming for our jobs anytime soon, but I do think that it is, um, I don't know, it's beyond my ego to try to say that I can predict at all what is happening, or going to happen. I do
You
think that
can
it is
try
going to
though.
happen faster now than I would have said 2, 3 years ago, in terms of how it changes. But I would say, I guess just my immediate imagination is more being done with the same amount of people or less people,
Hmm.
more people walking around with oversight over more machinery, and more, yeah, I don't know whether it's gonna be more specialized skills or actually more generalized skills,
Right.
because we've
Yep.
abstracted the specific programming language of this particular piece of equipment
Hmm.
into more of an understanding of how does process work? How do things get made? And then what processes, robotic and otherwise, do I need to oversee in order to make those things happen? But I
Absolutely.
think we have a lot more jobs that require someone to understand. the point of the plant, the inputs and the outputs of the line, the entire process and how it works, rather than somebody coming in and being trained only specifically to use one piece of equipment. And those people not needing to know the overarching process of the entire plant and how it actually creates value and how it works.
Absolutely. Well, as someone that does a prediction episode every single year, I'm actually a huge fan of predictions, right or wrong, because we're not perfect certainly, but I love looking into the future and kind of thinking about what it might look like, and I'm perfectly okay if I'm wrong and if it moves faster than I thought it was, or that I totally missed. But what I do find is that by thinking about that and actually disciplining myself to actually jump on the podcast and tell our audience, here's what we think is going to happen. It's actually one of our most popular episodes every year. Um, it forces a new line of thinking. So super, super excited about what the future holds. And I agree with you. We don't know for sure what the world of work is going to look like. And I think it's probably a combination of more specialized people and more systems thinkers and what have you. But the world will unfold and will reveal itself over time. And so we'll certainly know 5 or 10 years ago what that world of manufacturing looks like. I think it's a really exciting world, but it requires us to have people who are engaged, who are fascinated, who are lifelong learners, who are interacting with each other, sharing best practices. I know OT SCADACon, which we talked about briefly at the beginning. That's the event that you're a co-founder of, is a key way of doing that and so much more. So let us know a little bit about what OT SCADACon is all about.
Sure. So if you've seen the movie The Lion King, Mufasa says to Simba, "Son, everything that the sun touches is our kingdom."
We went from Moore's Law to The Lion King. I
Yeah,
love it.
sorry.
And I know both, by the way. I know The
I'm a
Lion
fan
King
of
well. Go ahead.
analogies, but I also like to not. I didn't grow up in the U.S., so there are some like obvious references that people make that sometimes I'm like, I don't know that.
That's awesome.
So I try just like with the random acronyms, like I forget that people don't know them. I try to define them as I go, but I'm getting better at that. I sometimes miss it. Um, but yeah, OT stands for operational technology. So that's kind of
Hmm.
the manufacturing side of IT, all the networking and stuff that goes into the machines on the factory floor. SCADA stands for supervisory control and data acquisition. So that's typically
Hmm.
a software system that takes in all the data from the sensors and all the machinery, right? And then displays dashboards and metrics more to, the business side and to the supervisors and whatnot. And so my co-host and co-founder, Alicia Gilpin, who is a chemical engineer turned controls engineer, we're both mm, um, not neurotypical, I guess I'll say. I have ADHD and she's on the spectrum, autism, and so she thinks in lists a lot, which is
Yeah.
great for like IO lists.
Yeah.
And engineers, a lot of engineers are, a little bit maybe think differently, which
Married to one. I know. Yeah.
very suited for all these different types of technical positions. But she came up with these topics, about 20 topics that she felt kind of were all different areas that sit underneath this umbrella of SCADA and the operational tech. And the idea was to bring in practitioners, people that are doing these things all the time, and come talk about what they do and what they have learned, any tips and tricks that they have, both from a technical learning standpoint, but also realizing, for instance, that Allie, being a chemical and a process engineer and becoming a controls engineer from there, she knows a lot about process engineering. And then
Hmm.
there's discrete uh, automation, for instance, like robotics, right? Pick and place, all kinds of things like that. And so Courtney Fernandez, our other co-host on the Automation Lady show, she's a robotics engineer. And they speak a lot of the same language, but they don't actually work on the same types of things.
Hmm.
And so we thought, hey, if you're gonna, be a person in this industry, it's really all about knowing all about what goes on in a manufacturing plant and how those different things talk to each other, how they affect each other, whether or not that's your area of expertise. You may never have to program a robot if you're a chemical engineer, but certainly you may want to know what goes into that if you're
Totally.
implementing a system that has something to do with robotics, up or downstream from you. So it's these 20 or so different practitioners that have 30-minute sections speaking about what they do, uh, to both teach you some areas of the industry that you may not know,
Hmm.
and then give you a great network of connections that understand all the different processes in the industry that you may not focus on. And that can help you find things you may not have known that would be a great career, sort of path for you to get into. Or it may help you become a more valuable team member because you now have connections for expertise that you didn't know before. And then you've got students, technicians, maintenance folks, engineers, leaders of departments, and CEOs. all sitting in the same room. And what you end up with is just this kind of like learning catalyst networking experience that is put on by the engineers themselves. So it's kind of also, I don't know, I don't want to call it a revenge of the nerds, but we have some fun and it's a bunch of weird people that maybe otherwise wouldn't have um, a great time networking with other folks.
One of the beautiful things about manufacturing is just I mean, there are, it does attract in a really good way, a lot of weirdos,
Yeah.
and so it makes life really really interesting because there are, and I'm one of them, right? So I'm speaking as someone who spent all those years in manufacturing. You get there because you're a little bit of a, you geek out on the on. You know what? I would actually say you stay there because you geek out on crazy stuff. A lot of people find their way into manufacturing. The people that make them part of their lifeblood and part of their livelihood, it's because you geek out on that kind of stuff. Which came first, the OT SCADA or Automation Ladies? Which one started first?
So Automation Lady started first.
Yep. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I came back onto LinkedIn during COVID. I had left the
Hmm.
industry for a while, and then during COVID, I got another job in the industry with a software startup. And obviously, the trade shows and things were not happening as much.
Right.
I wasn't traveling, so I started following people like Allie who were posting technical videos. She was at Pack Expo, and
Sure.
then I started to find some of these other and connecting with these other women, and we started a little group chat because before that, in our industry, in our career, we had typically been like one of a few women, if there was more than one on our team or in our office or in our location, right?
Hmm.
So it was not something that we were used to a lot, and we found each other on LinkedIn. We started a group chat for women in robotics and automation. Courtney Fernandez started this Zoom call on Saturdays where we could all show up with like our kids or whatever and just come and chat. And like, she's like, I have a robot in my garage and you guys can see it. And
Awesome.
I just thought, like, I was listening to an episode of this podcast somebody had recommended to me called Office Ladies, which is Angela and Pam from The Office.
Right.
They have a podcast together. They're actually they're best friends in real life
Yep.
and they
Awesome.
talk about The Office. And I
Big
was
fans of
listening
The
to that.
Office here at the podcast, by the way. Both producer Melissa and I are both big fans of The Office.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, it'd be so cool if I could talk to some of my friends about automation."
Right.
And then maybe, if it becomes something that's widely known enough, then the ladies when they're 1, 2, 3 in a location somewhere, they maybe can hear this. And maybe some of
Hmm.
them identify or find some camaraderie with our conversations. Maybe they find a role or a role model or, somebody that they can reach out to that they wouldn't have had being, kind of siloed in their location. And then the other thing I noticed, there's just a lot more content going on LinkedIn, and I love that. But most of it was still, by men, which is the majority of people in the industry. And so we initially were just like, man, we wish that there was more women making content. And I'm
Yeah.
just not one of
Why
those
not
people that will
us? Yeah.
complain about something for long. I either shut up about it or I do something about it.
Good for you.
And so I decided to do the podcast. And the idea was always that it was not about us, but about hopefully doing this long enough so that other people see that they can do it. And one of the best things that I had, I think, really propel me in my career was I tried to be brave about doing things that I didn't necessarily know how to do, even in public, and show people that I was learning and trying because, people do want to help you when you are
For
helping
sure.
yourself actively,
No
right? When
doubt.
they see that you're passionate. And so I want to show that to more people that there really is an infinite amount of things that you can learn and you can find support for that. You just have to, put yourself out there and keep trying and then the right people will find you.
It's exactly how it works. It's kind of like the Celestine prophecy or the coincidence we started out with in the beginning of the conversation. If you do put yourself out there, you make a little bit of noise. You've got some courage and some bravery. It's amazing how those opportunities find their way to you. We've got time for two last questions here for Nikki Gonzales before we close up shop here on the Tech Ed Podcast. Questions, Nikki, that we ask every single guest here on the podcast. So I want to get them to you one by one. First one is, and you have perhaps a different education background than a lot of our listeners, than a lot of our guests, having grown up in Iceland. What's something that you believe about education that would surprise other people?
I don't think that education is really as much about what you learn as just learning how to learn.
Hmm. Awesome.
Because especially nowadays, you can't learn at school everything you're going to need to know in the future. It's just not
For sure.
possible. So for me, I think the biggest takeaway, because I used to be like, man, why am I studying this? I'm never going to need to use this calculus in my career. And I was right. Like, I don't use calculus at all. But learning how to learn calculus has helped me to learn lots of other things. So
Awesome.
that's really how I think about education. And it is like lifelong learning, I think, too. You don't ever expect to be done.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the things we learn now, I mean, they may be outdated, a lot of them in a year, right? But the fact that you understand the importance of lifelong learning and how to learn over a lifetime, super, super important. And the last question for you, we're going to turn the clock back a little bit. We're going to go back to when you were a sophomore in high school or a 15-year-old. Go back to that point in time, Nikki, and tell us if you could give yourself one piece of advice as that 15-year-old, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say relationships and people matter almost as
Hmm.
much as what you know or what you're
Awesome.
doing. And I think it took me way too long to see that I don't have to do or know everything myself, and that actually going out on a limb and trying to really get to know people, because those relationships, they stay with you your entire career through different
Hmm.
jobs. Um, and no occupation or job or company is guaranteed to you.
Right.
So it's really that combination of lifelong learning, but I think also building your knowledge, but also by building your network. And
No
I
doubt.
wish I had known about that a lot earlier. And then the role that, if you have a network, typically you end up with mentors.
For
Um,
sure.
or, you can put in a lot of effort to get mentors. But that's also something that I didn't really know about or know how important it is. And I think I could have struggled a lot less if I had had more people in my life that were able to understand and help me with what I was going through. And that's why one of the reasons why I love the network that I've cultivated now with Automation Ladies and OT SCADACon so much, because I didn't know what I was missing, not having, more casual or like not at work relationships, but with people that are in the industry that understand kind of what we're doing and where we're going.
And to your earlier point, people want to help you, right? I mean, it's amazing to me how many people, and I get a lot of folks that come to me and say, "Hey, can you spend a half hour?" Absolutely. I mean, I'll do anything to help another person. I had so many great mentors early on, probably like you, and maybe some different angles on it, but didn't understand the value of people and relationships and how that really is the most important part of the work that we do. And whether it's mentoring another person, being mentored by somebody, lifelong learning, those relationships super super important. I'm glad that you're part of my network and vice versa, meeting each other on LinkedIn as we did, but again through that Celestine prophecy a few days before of, hey, have you heard about this really cool podcast? We're going to link that up on the show notes, by the way, where you can find Automation Ladies, what information you would like to have on OT SCADACon and how you can find that great organization, the cool work that Nikki is doing at Weintek and other resources as well. So super super thankful and grateful, Nikki, for you joining us, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I had a great time. Too bad an hour has gone by. As you know, I think we can talk about our special interests for a long time. So I appreciate you
Exactly.
giving me the
We'll definitely
opportunity.
do it again. Yeah, there was lots and lots of fun talking about all that manufacturing technology and where that's going. And we're just going to be we're not just spectators, but active participants in the future evolution of manufacturing technology. So looking forward to keeping up with you and seeing where things go. Mention the show notes. We have the best show notes in the business. You'll find those at techedpodcast.com/Gonzales. That is techedpodcast.com/Gonzales. That's where you'll find everything about this episode with Nikki, who, as we mentioned, is the Director of Business Development at Weintek USA, the co-founder of Automation Ladies, and the co-founder of OT SCADACon. When you're done checking out the show notes, go find us on social media, LinkedIn, where Nikki and I got to know each other. Maybe you find us on Facebook or on TikTok or on YouTube or on Instagram. Wherever you go for your social media, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast. When you find us, reach out and say hello. Love to hear from you. Can't wait to see you all again next week. Until then, I am your host, Matt Kirkner. Thank you so much for being with us.